Today, I'm joined by a returning guest, Mike Michalowicz. Mike is the author of Profit First, Fix This Next, Clockwork, and several other books that have shaped how owner-led companies think about money, priorities, and execution. When Mike was last on the podcast, we talked about why putting profit first has to be a behavior, not just a decision. How it's a system that owners understand intellectually, but struggle to execute consistently. Today, we're talking about Mike's new book, The Money Habit, where we pick up from that concept, taking it to the next level. It looks at what's happening underneath those systems, behaviors, and what's happening personally with our perhaps psychology. We talk about what really drives money stress and what happens in decision making and leadership and what happens when we build better money habits. So, Mike, welcome back to the podcast.
Brad, it's a joy to be back with you. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. So let's jump straight into it. The money habit. Entrepreneurs are good at building a business, perhaps, but then seem to perhaps sometimes develop habits that are not as good. In our last conversation, you talked about how money is a way to protect the people that we care about, not something to optimize endlessly.
Yeah.
But in this new book, you've continued on with that thinking. Why do you think that successful business owners struggle with this?
I think a challenge that business owners have is they don't recognize the duality of financial management. And what I mean is we think that if we nail it in our business alone, that we've nailed it in life. And that's not the reality. In fact, I've seen some businesses be very fiscally successful, but the business owner is struggling at home financially. And what happens is the home finances then leach off of the business and cripple the business. I've also seen the reverse, where someone has prepared for their future, they have sound financial management at home, but the business is struggling to get afloat. And so what they do is have the business leach off the home and the home crumbles down. I saw this repeatedly, and I've lived it myself. That was very clear to me that we needed to nail both of these frontiers of financial management for entrepreneurs in order to have a collective, sound, successful business.
Unless you've lived it or unless you've observed it, it doesn't seem to make any sense. Why do you think this is happening? What's going on in the background?
You know, it's funny. I noticed that I have the propensity to say, and now I catch myself, but I see the financial success of someone else, a celebrity, typically an athlete or something, and I'm astonished about how much money they make. And in the same moment, I say, and if I had that much money, I would never ruin myself like they have, because you see them squandering money and just losing it. I'm like, they have no clue. But what I've come to realize is my context is only my current financial state. And so when I see someone that has a lot more money, my mind still thinks, well, this is how my spend is now. All that money is surplus. But the reality is I will expand to meet the money that's available to me. And if I don't have a money management method or system, if I'm living check by check now, the flow of more money just amplifies that, and I'll continue to live check by check. So I think we always see ourselves as the exception. And I notice this in entrepreneurs. And if there's any community that can have a big lottery win, doesn't always happen, but sometimes it's the entrepreneur. They stick with their business long enough, the right elements happen, the right customer comes their way, and they have this boon of cash flow into their business. And just as quickly that money comes in, I see the entrepreneur often collapse. I've lived that. I've sold businesses. My lifestyle expanded and it grew to a point where it crippled my business and I came crumbling down.
You touched on a really important theory or concept from the book, which is my lifestyle expanded. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I thought that the more money I earned through my business, that the greatest expression of it was more stuff. I used them as logical arguments, but they were all emotional based. If I had a fancier car, surely, Brad, if we ran into each other, you'd be so impressed. You're more likely to want to do business with such a successful individual. I thought the more things I possessed, the more I impressed others. It really was this keep up with the Joneses syndrome. It was very ego driven, and yet I was blind to it. I'm in similar organizations you are. We were actually talking about some names of some common friends we have or acquaintances. I was just at an event where it's an entrepreneurial group, and I arrived at the networking period. I was invited to share some stuff about this and profit first. And what I noticed was everyone's talking about the top line. I'm doing 2 or 3 million in revenue. And someone's like, well, I'm doing 7 million. And someone's like, well, I'm the big dog at 15 million. There's this bravado and competition around size. And how I started out, which by the way is not a tip of how you start an event. I said, hey, I heard people talking about top line. Why aren't we talking about our business's health? Like, who's here's bragging about how sound the business is, how it's supporting the appropriate salaries for folks, where we've runways of cash, where we don't have to worry about surviving day to day. And that was an awkward way to start because it caused a lot of shock. So I don't suggest that. But I think that's the conversation we need to have. And that's something I didn't realize. I am now much more interested and proud of financial security, irregardless or irrespective of income. In fact, a smaller business that makes more money and sustains healthier is to me even more impressive than a large business that's just living check by check.
Yeah, I remember in my own business many years ago, we had about $10 million profit doing about, $10 million top line revenue doing about 10%. And our primary competitor was about 10 times the size, give or take 100 million. And they were doing about 100,000. So significantly less.
Yeah,
But they had many, many ways to justify it.
sure. Sure. And that's the danger.
Yeah.
One of the traps I see in businesses, but it's also our personal lives, is we achieve a certain level of income, turnover, whatever, in our business. And then when we see that we're not earning or retaining as much money as we anticipated, the solution is I need to increase the turnover. I need more revenue flowing through this organization. And then when it doesn't happen next year, it's like, oh, the solution's more sales. We get on this crazy cycle of sales cures everything. And that's not the truth. In fact, Profit First, which is the book that preceded The Money Habit. So The Money Habit, which I wrote, focused on personal finances. Profit First focused on business finances. What I tell people is Profit First won't fix your business, but what it will do is tell you what needs to be fixed within your business. In other words, when we run a business and we start taking its profitability immediately, a percentage of our revenue, it reveals all the things that we were covering up by not being profitable in the first place. Bloated on salaries or not pricing right or inefficiencies. When you start reserving money, you start exposing the weak spots. And it's true in our personal finances too. When we start preserving money, perhaps for future events or activities, when we retain money to cover aspects of our life that are important to us, we'll see what's truly available for everything else. It exposes those things. And now we have the opportunity to consciously face this and make prudent, healthy decisions for ourselves.
This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan to build the business that you want and the life that you want. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. And you can also check out our books, Made to Thrive, which is about the 5 roles of a CEO, becoming a great CEO rather than just a good CEO in your business. Second is Onboarded, which is about hiring and onboarding great people, making sure that you give yourself the greatest chance for people to succeed in your organization. And then third is Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better, which is about building a business that is better rather than bigger. It's not about building a little business. It's about building a business that compounds, a business that you can actually fall in love with again. Since we last had you as a guest on the podcast, I released a book, and one component of that was about better financials and then translating that. And what I advocated in that book was that money should flow out of a business 3 ways. It should be going to reinvest back into the business. It should be going to fund your lifestyle, and it should be to fund personal wealth. Can you talk us through your reaction to that? And because I know that whilst I've probably explained, there might be one more paragraph than that. Like it's a very, very simple concept in what I've written, but can you explain your reaction to that idea and where it goes wrong?
Well, I don't know if it does go wrong. I use different terminology perhaps, but I think we have a congruency here. What I've noticed is, and there's a saying that desperate people do desperate things. When we have less runway, when we are living check by check, businesses revert to a very reactionary mode. My gosh, if we don't make some immediate sales, maybe we should run a discount today. And we look at the very short term cash insurgence flow at the long term cost of profitable, healthy sales. So, what we want to do is to reserve cash to first give us runway. It allows us to slow down and say, what are the prudent moves? So, the less cash you have, the less time you have to move that business forward. The more cash you have reserved, we call it cash equity. The more cash you've reserved in your business, the more runway you have and the more thoughtfulness that can come about. So I think that's part of what you were talking about, the reservation of cash. And it then facilitates the concept of reinvestment. Reinvestment, I actually don't use the term reinvestment. I use the word expense because if we're taking profit or reserves and spending it, it's an expense. Reinvestment indicates a prudent use of funds, not a reactionary use. And so first we need cash equity for runway, have a buffer. Then we say, how can I invest $1 for a return of $2 within a predictable time frame? That is the prudent use of funds. And sadly, most businesses don't do that because we just got to sell now, man. We just got to sell now. And the last part, perhaps not last in priority, but the last part is owner wealth. I've surveyed now, I was actually just traveling through Australia. This goes back about 3 months ago. I was predominantly in Sydney. I've been to Adelaide, Perth, Gold Coast, Canberra. And what I've discovered in surveying audiences throughout Australia, throughout the United States, throughout a lot of this world is to the person, everyone has started their business, at least in part, to support a degree of financial independence. In fact, the 3 primary reasons to start a business I hear from people is I want to be financially free, not worry about bills. I want to be personally free, be able to have flexibility in my lifestyle, time-wise. And I want to have impact. I want to be of service to the community. And we prioritize them in different ways. But this financial component is relatively consistent. I would say 90% of business owners have started their business in concern of financial freedom. And yet very few achieve it. So to your point, that is extremely important. That our business is supporting a lifestyle of financial comfort or wealth that allows us to then focus our time on our business. Because if we're in our personal finances living hand to mouth, that distracts us from serving our business. And it's funny, I tell people, if you don't have financial independence, financial freedom, and if you don't have personal freedom, so if you're living check by check and you have to be the person serving the business and you're working through holidays and doing all these things just to keep the business floating, you can never have the impact you intended. Those are the 2 mandatory foundations. So I think how you explain it and I explain it, maybe different words, but I think contextually very similar.
So there's 2 scenarios that you've painted. People are either reinvesting so much of the profit back into the business and not taking anything out, that they're living sparsely, or they're living beyond their means, and then the business is suffering. So there's these 2 scenarios. People may answer or justify by saying, but this is just how I am with money, where we're protecting their behaviors. What does that cost them over time, and how do they readjust that mindset?
What they call the Ebenezer syndrome, Ebenezer Scrooge. And that character was designed around a real individual. I document them in the book, The Money Habit. And unfortunately, at the moment, I can't remember the person's name. I think he was a British fella. And he had accumulated so much wealth, but was so concerned about the spend that he was eating spoiled food so that he didn't have to spend money on food. He was living in a home that had no lights, even though at the time electricity existed, because it was too expensive. And the most crazy part was he injured both his legs in a fall. He broke both legs, and he only paid for one leg to be healed medically because it was cheaper and he thought he'd get by with one leg. It's an extreme case, and that is a syndrome that transcends logic. It's a mental disability in my opinion.
Yeah.
I've seen that Scrooge syndrome implement in business. And what that does is it cripples the business. Similar to repairing one leg, the business can't have the impact you want. Conversely, I see the overspend. And what it is I need to live large, or I want to live large. But also it expresses the way it expressed to me is often we justify either decision, the spendthrift or the big time spender, in that this will be a benefit in some capacity. If I don't spend any money, the business will grow. But no, you're not leveraging money. But if in the other scenario where you're overspending money, we say, well, it's impressing people and it's attracting money. Neither case is necessarily true. I think what we need to do is bring subconscious behavior to conscious awareness. I'm not saying we can necessarily fix this, but we can get to where we no longer deny it. So I did in the money habit to tell people at the bank level, because most people log into their bank accounts, set multiple accounts with the name of the intentional use of that money. So in our personal front, if money's used to pay for groceries and one's used to pay for the rent or the mortgage on the flat, and another one's used for vacation. If you want to go out to dinner one night and you don't have enough money to go to dinner in one of an accounts, designated for dinner, and you decide, I'll take it from the mortgage account to go out to dinner. You can still do that. There's no barrier that prohibits you from doing it, but you can no longer subconsciously pull from a random pool. Now, perhaps the first time, it's a conscious awareness saying, I've actively decided to take some money from my mortgage to cover for dinner, and I can't deny it. And now if I can't pay my mortgage, I know why. And I think that's the first step to whatever syndrome or category we fall in. And it's like a spectrum. We're all somewhere. Bring it to conscious awareness. That brings clarity. With clarity, you start asserting control. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, control. Control, it's an interesting word because that's what you talk about in the book. So where is control important, and how does money isn't about income, but it's about control? I think
That's right.
That's what you said in the book, right? So
That's exactly it.
Yeah. So where do owners overestimate how much control they have?
Well, business owners overestimate in many capacities. But first, let me define what control is. Control is a conscious awareness of decisions you're making and a clarity on the impact it's having. Where owners kind of fall off the wagon is that we have a single account. So when I talk about the business owner, most people say, well, our deposits, our income goes into an account and we pay most of our bills from that. Well, it's one heap of cash. And yet a business has many responsibilities. We have responsibility to pay expenses, our operating expenses. We have responsibilities to pay taxes. I've yet to visit any country where the government doesn't stick its hand in the coffers of a business to take money out. VAT, whatever the term is, income tax, there's always a term for it, but the government sticks its hand in. We have responsibilities to pay salaries of our employees. We have responsibilities to pay ourselves. Gosh, we're an employee of the company. But we don't categorize it. So it's one lump sum. We fall victim to this thing called a primacy effect. And the primacy effect is what's immediately in front of us, we put a disproportionate significance in. If we feel wronged in the moment, we are deeply wronged. Our life is miserable. If we have a need or a thought, I need to buy some new computer equipment, I'll look at my bank accounts and see if there's enough money there. And if there's enough money, hey, I need these computers. So I put extraordinary significance in acquiring those computers. And then what I don't do is consider the longevity. What's the long-term impact? So if I've been wronged, I don't think about how many times I've been righted. If I'm looking to buy computers, I don't think about, I also have salary and the rent and et cetera, et cetera. So what we need to do as owners is realize we achieve control when we have clarity before action. What is the intentionality behind this money? And the way to do it is a real simple solution. If you log into your bank with any regularity, once a month, once a week, daily, that's amazing. In fact, the more frequently, the better, because that's our natural pattern. That's where we need a system. It's called a commitment device. It's a behavioral technique that when you do something repeatedly, you're likely to repeat it. So instead of trying to change that repetition, encourage it and set a device up that redirects to the outcome we want. So we set up multiple accounts at your bank. We have labels of what the intentionality is behind that money. And before we spend it, we can automate this. When income comes in, we, on a percentage basis or a fixed dollar basis or a mix, we divide the money up to its different categories. And now we spend accordingly within those categories. And as I shared earlier, if you decide to breach that and pull from another account to cover something, you can still cheat the system. But You can't keep it subconscious. Now you're aware you're cheating. And with that, improvement comes about.
In the behaviors that feed that issue, how much do you think that the avoidance, I'll rephrase that, the minimization of tax in a business affects that, A, and B, the undisciplined pursuit of growth?
Yeah. Okay. So the minimization of tax is, I don't know how it works globally as well as I do in the US, but it's funny. We're told here in the US, the more expenses you incur in your business, you'll reduce your tax consequence. You can save $5 by spending $100. So it's this perverted belief that reducing taxes is healthy, but in the long run, it's very damaging. Now, there's certain expenses that you need to incur, and you should do all you can to minimize your tax liabilities. I don't question that. Just a healthy business and a healthy lifestyle financially, both of those will inevitably result in more taxes. That's just how it works. So when you're being taxed more, the general rule of thumb is you're doing better. Taxes are such a painful thing because it's money being taken from us. We want to use ways to avert that loss because we have this thing called loss aversion. So a technique is to allocate money to tax liabilities before it even comes into our own hands. So before you personally earn it, hide that money away from you, and it reduces some of that pain. Now, this on the flip side, you're talking about growth, particularly uncontrolled growth. The risk is, particularly for small business owners who are just starting out. I often hear people say, "Wow, we had 100% growth this year." They said we went from, 200,000 in revenue to 400,000 in revenue. And they say, we expect next year to double ourselves and double and double. And if we do this 5 years in a row, we're like $100 million organization or whatever the numbers are. But the realization is what we need as entrepreneurs is growth when you're small is very easy. Growth when you're
Mm.
big is very different. So therefore, because we believe it's easy to do, we will seek easy paths to try to replicate it. And that's when we start compromising the integrity of our organization. We don't stay true to our core products. We diversify our offering because we have captive customers, but we also diversify our ability to do things exceptionally well. So those businesses I see at risk, and that's uncontrolled growth when it's grow for revenue as opposed to grow out of quality of your offering and focus on a community.
Which is what you can focus on your core competencies. What can you be the best at? Don't sell things that you've got no business selling or doing.
That's right.
When you write a book, you learn things. What did you learn as you went through the journey of writing this book, if anything?
Yeah. Such a great question and such a good one for us to wrap up on. I know we both have a time crunch and I was hoping you'd ask. The number one thing I've discovered as an author is that when you, the proverbial author, writes a book, inevitably you're also writing it for yourself. There's a saying, and I'm sure it's from some ancient wisdom, is the greatest student in the room is always the teacher. What I found is when I wrote Profit First and when I wrote this book, The Money Habit, and all my books, I was exploring something that I myself have not mastered. And in the process, well, I can't say I'm a master of money. I've radically improved because I had to codify and simplify it even for myself. And the other part is funny, as I travel the world and speak with folks, I'd be the ultimate hypocrite if I don't live by these systems. So I live by the money habit and it's transformed my relationship with money, my family, our relationship collectively with money. And that's been the biggest learning lesson is how much is actually selfishly serve myself.
Mike, what haven't we covered off today that you wanted to cover off?
One last little thought is if you have clients, your clients want you to be really good with money. Now, they won't say that. They won't say, hey, I wish you were charging more or something. But we all know that a person that has no access to funds is at risk and they can't be attentive to us. Imagine a doctor coming out to perform surgery on you and say, I have no money. I don't know how I'm going to cover my mortgage this month. Oh my God, I'm really in trouble. I can't even afford lunch. You ready for your procedure? As opposed to a doctor comes out and says, not only can I afford my house, I was able to afford 2 homes. I have security for years and years of my life, and lunch is being delivered right now. Are you ready for your procedure? Who do you want operating on you? The person who has sound security because they can devote their attention to you. Now, you may not be providing life-saving services like a doctor, but you're providing life-altering services or products. It is impacting people. And we want to consume from someone that isn't desperate. We want someone who's confident. So we actually want our vendors being very profitable.
And stable. Mike, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. I love the way that you've continued to explore this rabbit hole of small to medium businesses being profitable and sustainable in a really sensible way. The work that you're doing is impactful right across the world. So thank you, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me. This has been a joy. Take care, Brad.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.